Hi, my name is Tanishka and I felt moved to create a response to the film The Red Pill. Now, this is a doco, for those that haven't seen it, about the men's rights movement that was banned here in Australia by Palace Cinemas after protests about its inherent misogyny. Now, given that it's about gender equality, I felt compelled to watch it in order to make up my own mind and form an opinion. Now, the views that are offered by many of the male activists in the film are largely based on the book The Myth of Male Power, written by Dr. Warren Farrell. So this is far from offering a new viewpoint. I read this book 20 years ago and I loved it. It highlights how patriarchy has not benefited men in the least. And their symptoms are very different, but they're equal to those that have been the suffering of women. So squabbling now over who is the biggest victim is like two seagulls fighting over a chip, to use an Australian slang term. Totally pointless. So unfortunately, the underlying message of this film is undermined by the fact that these guys blame women for their situation, which is potentially very dangerous because it incites anger. So I can understand why some women were very afraid for men in particular to see this film, given that we already have one woman killed here every week in Australia due to domestic violence. So this sort of disempowering outcome in the film is compounded by the young female filmmaker who unravels in overwhelm and confusion. And so she's unable personally to offer any real solution for a new way forwards. So this film is helpful, however, in lifting the scab off the festering wound of the misogyny of the collective wounded masculine, which plays out outwardly in destructive behaviour, not just towards women, but towards the feminine part of men. So this is self-destructive behaviour that results in men impacting their own health and well-being and relationships in disastrous ways. So the other thing this film does is it really polarizes those that are already firmly anchored on sides in the gender war. So it, ultimately is good because it's got us talking about this issue again. So what is the way forwards? Well, this is why I felt compelled to make the video. I felt that I had some sort of contribution to make to the global conversation on this, which wasn't represented in the film. I honestly feel the way forwards is, number one, stop the blame game, okay? It's like watching a bad divorce litigation escalate. We are better than that as a global village. We need to focus our attention on creating solutions, since it is clear that the current paradigm of patriarchy isn't working for anybody. So how do we do that? Well, by realizing that all this infighting really boils down to a misinterpretation of what patriarchy is. Now, I'll explain what I mean. The current dictionary term, if you look up patriarchy, you will see a society where men hold power. Now, this level of understanding as a definition keeps us locked in an us or them scenario where it's women versus men, men versus women, and there really are clearly no winners. It's not helpful. So patriarchy goes far beyond our physical gender. Patriarchy is a mindset within men, within women, where we value the masculine traits, the masculine attributes, more than the feminine attributes, values and traits. In fact, anything that's feminine, community, spirituality, art, ritual, family, relationships, emotional growth is devalued. It is not given the same credence, the same worth. So this plays out differently for men and women, although the impact is equal. I'll explain what I mean. In women, we experience the oppression of our feminine attributes externally out in the world, okay? So we don't receive fair exchange for our time and effort as artists, as mystics, healers, carers, volunteers, spiritual advisors, and so on. Whereas men experience the oppression of their feminine in an internal way. They don't allow themselves to dare express their inner self, their feminine. So they don't cry or risk sharing their innermost feelings with their closest friends, particularly male friends. So for men, it's covert oppression. For women, it's overt oppression, but equal in their human cost. Forgive me, I've made notes. I was so passionate that I really get across clearly what I mean, because I feel this is so important to us as a species. It is true that men hold positions of external power, but what they lack in true inner power. Emotionally and psychologically, they are not resilient. Why? Because they haven't received any adequate initiation or mentoring into their manhood. So they don't know who they really are as men. So they can't be in right relationship with their masculine self-expression, their masculine power, their masculine identity. So what men do is they compensate for feeling like an eternally lost boy by trying to appear powerful externally. Kind of like, you know, those puffer fish when they're scared and they go poof to try and appear more intimidating, but really it just telegraphs how fearful they are. So this is why, like a puffer fish doubling in size, size is so important to men in a patriarchal culture. And I'm not just talking about the size of their appendage. They've got to drive a big car. They've got to have a big bank account. They've got to grow big muscles. They need to inflate their sense of self-worth, to beat their chest and assert their masculine bravado. Now, a man who has true power doesn't need to do this. He does not need to seek out combat to prove his manhood. He does not need to kill wildlife and stick a deer head on his wall to prove how much of a man he is. He does not need to destroy the environment to prove his dominion over the elements. He doesn't need to make a killing at work at others' expense. He doesn't need to destroy his opponents on a sports field or fantasize about dominating the feminine sexually, whether that's the feminine in a man or the feminine in a woman. These are the behaviours of a wounded, immature man. So we don't need the red pill doco telling us that men are really powerless. They're telling us in every way imaginable. A man who possesses true power within himself does not need to convince anybody else that he is a man with an outward show of bravado. He knows who he is, inside and out, and that's what gives him true strength to be able to act in any situation from his own inner authority. To acquire that, he needs to face the darkness within, his greatest fears in the inner realms, which is scary for a guy because that is the terrain of the feminine, the inner feminine. And that is why the greatest heroes in the ancient world sought out wisdom from the wisdom keepers, the priestesses, the wise women, to help them face their inner dragon. Men who don't do this, they don't express their feminine side. They try to oppress it. So they oppress their feelings, their creativity, their inspiration, their intuition, their vulnerability. And the cost is they don't live as long. They use substances like alcohol to suppress their feelings, to shut down their heart. They become absent to their partners and to their children. They use virtual games to help them shut down from reality. They look to external authority figures rather than to themselves. They hide from true intimacy by escaping into virtual relationships, such as pornography, which drains them and just creates addiction and dependency. And they're more likely to commit suicide. So, why do men suppress their feminine side? Well, it's for fear of being rejected, not just by women, but by men, and ultimately by themselves. The shame that they've taken on from their patriarchal upbringing and conditioning. So women are not responsible for men's pain. The only ones who can help men are themselves, but most of them don't know where to start. So what can men do? Well, they can adapt some of the feminine attributes to develop their feminine side so that they become whole rather than half a man walking around pretending to be a real man. They can find strength in community, communion. The feminine finds strength by drawing together. This is how we strengthen our feminine side and become more emotionally and psychologically resilient. This is why our ancestors lived in intentional communities to help each other stay strong through the dark times, like autumn and winter, when we can really go into our dark night of the soul, that being men's annual period, winter solstice, because men are ruled by the sun. It's their death and rebirth time, and when men are most at risk of suicide and depression. So our ancestors understood that we need each other. We are vulnerable. And if we're going to grow strong partnerships and strong families, we need the support of a strong community. Men in ancient times would sit around a fire in circle and they would talk. They would share their feelings. They would open up. Now, just sitting in circle is a feminine construct. This is not something boys do at school. This is what girls do at school, so it can be really quite terrifying, or at least confronting and foreign for a man to even think about attending a men's circle if he's grown up with a patriarchal mindset, devaluing anything feminine, mocking it. But sharing in circle is how men learn to develop their inner strength, by confronting their vulnerabilities, being seen in their vulnerability, witnessing each other in their vulnerability, and finding the support of brotherhood. Not mateship, where things are kept at surface level, only talking about politics and sport, but really speaking from the heart, developing the ability to see into each other's souls. That's true brotherhood. This is how men develop greater self-acceptance and heal deep-seated shame that they have about their own inner sensitivities, their feminine, which is viewed as a sign of weakness in one whose inner patriarch is dominant. But a man who is able to honour his feelings, who is able then to lead from his heart, he becomes self-directed, which is true power. That is when a hero is born. And a man who has awakened the hero within does not need to put others down to feel powerful. He can then share power with his brothers and with his partner. We learn this by passing a talking stick around, so each person has equal right, time, and safe space to be truly heard and truly seen in speaking his truth. That is how men learn to share power, instead of adopting an attitude of he who speaks loudest is heard. So, I invite any man out there who is not in a men's circle to help shift this paradigm by starting a brotherhood circle with your friends, with your inner circle. It takes real balls to even suggest it. But it is the way to get real and to grow into your full masculine potential. So I was guided to create a template for men which is delivered as an online course you can do in the privacy of your own home, and it step by step takes you through everything that you would need to create a men's circle in your community. So thank you for watching, thank you for listening, and blessings.